Bitcoin is valuable because you escape the entropy and chaos of the real world. Bitcoin is valuable because it's 1,000,000 times faster, smarter, cheaper because it's digital. And Bitcoin is valuable because nobody can debase it. And you only have to believe one of those three things to think it's going up forever. The big idea here is that in the year 2024, the SEC approved the first digital commodity in the history of the world, Bitcoin, and fair value accounting became optional. And in January of 2025, this month, fair value accounting for that digital commodity became mandatory. And we expect in the first week of the Trump administration for SAB 121 to be repealed, and that means that every major bank in the world will be allowed to bank Bitcoin. So what you have is a status quo for 80 years where a corporation could have all of their assets in real estate, in gold, in soybeans, in oil, or in treasuries. But of course, the only thing that looks liquid and fungible is treasuries, and it doesn't beat the cost of capital. And now, Satoshi invents this new digital commodity. It takes 15 years for people to decide that it isn't tulip bulbs. It takes many years for the government to embrace it. And in the year 2025 is probably the first year where you could reasonably say the banks will probably handle it, the government's not going to ban it, and it really is a commodity. And so now, if you run a publicly traded company, you have a choice between Bitcoin or bonds. And the bonds are minus 10% real yield, and the Bitcoin is plus 45% real yield for the past 8 years. And you know, you might not be sure that you're going to keep getting plus 45% real yield, but I would submit to you that even if Bitcoin's returns collapse to the S&P index, and if you said it's just as good as the S&P, having a commodity that performs like the S&P is 10% better than using a bond. And so the real revolution in corporate finance for a CEO is you have the opportunity to recapitalize a company on a BTC standard instead of a USD standard. And what that means physically is you go from being negatively polarized to capital to being positively polarized to capital. Instead of being repulsive to capital, you're attractive. Wouldn't you like to walk into a meetings and be attractive instead of being repulsive when you walk in the meeting? And what that means to MicroStrategy is we just stumbled on this. We discovered this. We weren't trying to discover it. We were in the middle of the lockdowns, and we were kind of irritated, frustrated, desperate. And so we had $500 million of capital with zero return, and we thought we got to invest in something. Should we buy gold? Should we buy art? Should we buy real estate? Should we buy diamonds? Or should we buy crypto gold? And we thought, well, we'll buy some crypto gold called Bitcoin, and we inadvertently recapitalized to the BTC standard. And then, of course, if your capital is returning more than the S&P 500, you're creating shareholder value. How much capital can you gather? Like, if I'm a hedge fund and I say I return consistently twice the S&P 500, how much do you want to invest in me? The answer is, how much money do you want? And if I go to you and I say I'm a hedge fund and I consistently underperform the S&P by 50%, how much capital do you want to invest in me? None. You're either magnetically attracting the capital or you're rejecting it. So MicroStrategy stumbled on a new idea: recapitalize on an asset which is accretive, not dilutive. And when we did that, we started attracting more capital. We went from having $500 million of cash non-performing, like a liability, to having $45 billion worth of Bitcoin going up 60% a year. And we went from a $600 million enterprise value to a $100 billion enterprise value. And we went from not being able to borrow any money to borrowing $7 billion for almost nothing. And we went from not being able to sell, we couldn't have sold the entire company for $10 a share. We couldn't have sold it for $1 billion or whatever. to being able to sell $18 billion of equity at, 30x the price. And what's happening is we simply change the polarity of the balance sheet. And I think that's the exciting opportunity for a public company or any financeable company. Any company that can raise equity or debt financing has a use of proceeds which is transparent, high speed, accretive, and scalable. And you didn't have it 4 years ago, you didn't have it 10 years ago, you never had it for 100 years. All corporate finance textbooks, every course at Harvard, they're all built on a US dollar treasury standard in the absence of a crypto capital network. And I think now you have to rethink corporate finance. You have to rethink everything. I mean, there's a lot of narratives. Some people would say the reason you want Bitcoin is because the currency is being debased. And that's definitely true if you live in Lebanon or you live in Venezuela or you live in Africa. When the currency collapses in 5 years or 10 years, then obviously you want the Bitcoin. But there's another reason the Bitcoin price goes up. And the other reason the price goes up is because it's digital. And that just means that at the end of the day, if I can move $1 billion from New York to Tokyo and back again every hour, every second, every millisecond, there's utility in that. Digital books, digital education is 1 million times faster, cheaper, lighter than the real thing. And so the digital form of capital is valuable, even if you ran the country perfectly and there was no inflation, but you could still program the money to move at the speed of light 24/7, 365, and put a AI that's 1 billion times smarter than me or you in charge, there would still be utility for that. And then the third reason it's going up is Bitcoin represents digital capital or capital in cyberspace. I give you $1 billion and I tell you buy stuff in Russia. And so you buy a bunch of stuff in Russia, and then what? The Russian government perfectly operates in every way, and then you stop the passage of time and nothing ever decays or grows old, and then I guess it's almost as good, but not digital. But the point is, the passage of time continues. Governments don't run efficiently. The mayor may not do what you expected. Stuff rusts. There's a hurricane. There's a fire. All of those things are entropy and chaos in the real world. So it's my long-winded way of saying Bitcoin is valuable because you escape the entropy and chaos of the real world. Bitcoin is valuable because it's 1 million times faster, smarter, cheaper because it's digital. And Bitcoin is valuable because nobody can debase it. And you only have to believe one of those three things to think it's going up forever.
I just want to take a step back and get a sense from you of why it's not tulips 2.0 and how you came to that conclusion back in 2020.
The big idea is we want to keep our money, okay? And so, as I said, if God came down and said, I'll run the bank for you and I'm going to issue you God coin, there's going to be 21 million of them, and then you can telepathically move them between each other, and I will custody God coin for the next 1,000,000 years for free for you, then all these rich people would put their money in God's bank and they would use the God coin, and it would serve as a store of value for them because it's better than gold, it's better than diamonds, it's better than buying Picasso artworks, it's better than buying the local bonds, in whatever local African country you live in, etc. But God hasn't chosen to do that. So the next best thing is maybe they decide to hire a computer programmer and they get some cypherpunk or some engineer and they say, can you actually program a digital bank that does the same thing? So it's not going to be God coin, it's going to be Bitcoin. And we want you to set it up so that we can buy, so you've got 21 million of these units, and we're going to put our money in the Bitcoin bank, and that way we don't trust any other bank and any other government, and it's a network that we all join, a secure monetary network. And then at some point, one of them says, well, I don't think I trust you. And so none of the 100 families trust each other. And maybe even if they did, they don't trust their idiot grandsons that will come along in 60 years. So the question is, how do you actually create the Bitcoin network or the Bitcoin bank such that it is stable, it'll go on for hundreds of years when no one trusts anybody? What's the solution? And the answer is, we create a version of the software and we give it to everybody. And everybody on the network gets to run the software, and the software checks everybody else's software, and anybody that ends up lying gets kicked off the network. So every single family runs a version of the bank, and maybe every person in the family runs a version of the bank. And that's how we get to a decentralized network. Pretty soon, everybody with money on the network is running the software. So why is it not tulips? It's not tulips because all of the smart money in the world wanted to solve this problem. Why wouldn't you, right? Like for 1,000 years, people have wanted to keep their money. It's like the theme of human history. People want to keep their money. So they want to solve the problem. This is a crypto solution to the problem. I create a bank in cyberspace to keep my money. And then it gets copied 100,000 times. And the first 50 times it fails, and then eventually someone has a good one, and we call the good one, the one that won was the one that won, right? I mean, why did you win and why did everybody else lose? Someone had to win. There had to be one Google, there had to be one Microsoft. Why are we speaking English? Why aren't we speaking French? There had to be a winning language, and why do we use the US dollar? Because there was a winner, right? So at the end of the day, the idea is simple. It's a decentralized network protocol to keep your money without depending upon a government or a corporation or without relying on anybody, right? It's a protocol for economic integrity. It's obviously a good idea. You can duplicate 1,000,000 times, just like you can copy Wikipedia 1,000,000 times, but there's got to be one winning network, and the winning network is the one where all the smart people with the money join. It's just like, you know, if everybody puts their money in JP Morgan and you have Yo-Yo Bank, which is cheaper, but all the rich people have their money in JP Morgan, it's probably safer to put your money in the bank with all the rich people. Why? I copied New York City and Kansas. Why don't people move there? Well, they can either go to New York or they can go to Kansas, York, and they just went to New York. There's a lot of reasons why. And so Bitcoin is the most powerful crypto network in the world. It's got all the computer power, it's got all the economic power, it's got all the political power, it's got all the electrical power. Is it not tulip bulbs? It's 20 nuclear reactors worth of electricity, right? That's how it's not tulip bulbs. And another way to say it, though, it is basically, it is a monetary union. If you join a union and 1,000,000 other workers join the union and all of you get together and collectively negotiate your salary and your salaries go up by 50% and some guy writes an article saying, isn't that tulips? What is that? No, there's 1,000,000 people. We all joined together to protect our own interests. How about a 1,000,000-person army? I got an army in front of you. We have guns. You disagree with me. You could say it's not an army, but there's the army, right? So Bitcoin is, in essence, it's a monetary network, and it formed organically through a competitive process. And every weaker idea or inferior idea failed in the marketplace of ideas. And the ultimate endorsement of a monetary network is somebody with $1 billion willing to put their money into the monetary network. And if they are, then is someone else with more money willing to support another network? And the answer is all the money chose this one. And that's why it's not tulips. It's just a network.